what did I do? I had these kids like everyone. I knew that they were bright, but for me they were just those kids who will always be behind with reading and spelling, and really didn't have the first idea what to do with them. I remember being one of those teachers who would get stuck into children for copying from the board and making a spelling mistake and calling that pure laziness. And the hair in the back of I feel awfully ashamed when I think of how I did that, because I knew no better. But I'm sure I wrecked a lot of kids before I knew what I was doing.
Well, I was one of those parents. I was a trained teacher. Why couldn't I spot this? My son wasn't diagnosed until the end of year 4, year 5. And I should have known. I should have been able to spot it. He'd had, from kindergarten through to year 4, but none of those teachers spotted it either. So, and there is that sense of guilt that why didn't I spot this? Why couldn't I fix this? Why couldn't I do anything? And the reason why I couldn't was because I was trained just the same way in those whole word or balanced methodologies that just don't work.
I've taught for a lot of years, and you would always have a couple of kids in your class that just didn't get it. And obviously now when I look back, this is obviously what it was, that these kids possibly had dyslexia. And, you kind of feel a bit like a bit of a failure when you have children leaving your class and they haven't got it, and you haven't been able to help them to get it because that's your job. So, now that we know, and now that we know that this helps them, but it just, as I said, it helps all of them.
I've just noticed that these kids do struggle and they need that support, the extra support. And, no one likes to feel, embarrassed that they can't do something. So I wanted to be able to help. A lot of kids that were lacking confidence and doubting themselves and really struggling, with the spelling and reading in front of the class and things like that. So I had to change the way that I was teaching and incorporate a lot more technology and just take that pressure off.
I just can't believe that in our country, a kid can get to that age and still have that level of severity in their reading issue, and for alarm bells to not be sounding, in a big way. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there should be emergency vehicles around a kid like Dylan. I find it devastating that kids like that don't get the right help.
That we can and we will do a lot better in Australia, but we're trailing in a lot of ways. But there is this way we know to teach these kids. They don't have to suffer like they do. Just understanding, even without a teacher not knowing how to teach in a multisensory way, just teachers understanding that these kids will forget and forget and forget when it comes to the skills of literacy, and that it's not laziness, and it's not that their parents don't read to them enough or listen to them read enough. It's this thing we call reading disability, and it's real, and we mustn't blame children for it, because who on earth would go to school and decide that today I'm going to really struggle to learn to read and write?
The old-fashioned way of thinking about dyslexia was it was a reading difficulty and it couldn't be diagnosed until a child had failed at reading for 2 years. Do we want that? I mean, do you really want children to struggle and not cope with reading? Absolutely not. So based on what I've just been talking about, that there is that group of children that have difficulty processing and encoding speech sounds. And there will be certain types of speech patterns, speech error patterns that we will hear and we will notice, and we won't be able to say, oh, this child is going to have dyslexia or this child is going to have reading difficulties. But we might say, this child has some characteristics that make us feel that there might be a risk. And that's early identification, and it allows early intervention.
That it's really important to identify the children who might be the ones who are going to struggle with that particular kind of learning. They may not struggle with other kinds of learning. They're fantastic at maths or other things. They're going to struggle with that particular kind of learning. And if we can pick them through things like testing their letter knowledge or their phonological skills, then we can really focus on giving those children the most systematic reading instruction that we can intensively early on, because that's what they need.
We know that children who are behind in year 1 are almost certainly going to be behind in year 7 and are going to be even further behind in their 10th and 11th and 12th year of schooling. That gap is just going to get bigger and bigger. So we know that early intervention is absolutely the key. We have to be getting in very early and picking up any child who is at risk of literacy failure and putting in place very, very good support and intervention for those children.
Early, that's Robina State School's innovative footprint, early. So first of all, early identification, then early assessment and early intervention. If a child hasn't developed the ability to read by the end of year 2, the stats tell us they'll never close the gap. There's something like a 1 in 9 chance that they'll close the gap as they progress through school. So that's why early, no longer can we wait for kids to fail.
Just that early identification, because as soon as you get them, you can work with them. And I said, these children that are having difficulties, and they're having quite extensive difficulties, but they are still learning. They're not learning as quickly as the other children, but they are learning. They can sit down and actually write a sentence, which I have never seen that.
We've begun screening all of the prep children at the start of term 2. This screening looks at their rhyming, their segmenting, their blending, their ability to identify letters, their ability to recall strings of words in sentences and numbers for short-term memory. It gave us an indication of any children that may slip under the radar. We are far more explicit in our teaching of the spelling rules and each individual sound and phoneme. We make sure it's much more multisensory, so all the children are having a much more hands-on approach. We have small support sessions for those children who need the overlearning, so those children will be working with individually, in pairs or in a small group in order to fill those phonemic awareness gaps and move those children forward.
Sophie, what do we change mop into? Cop. I wonder what our next word is going to be. I want you to change cop into cap. Cop into cap.
One of the really encouraging responses to the National Work Party was an acknowledgement by the government that dyslexia, as we defined it, falls under the Disability Discrimination Act, and that's quite a breakthrough, really, because we now know that people who've got dyslexia have got that protection. They have a legal right to have reasonable accommodations, and the awareness that that's the case really needs to be out there. So a young person has a right to be in a situation where they can succeed and where their potential can be realised.
On the question of whether dyslexia is covered as a disability under the legislation, I know that some people say, oh, no, dyslexia is not recognised. It's not a disability. In the disability discrimination legislation and area, disability is defined very, very widely. And I haven't memorized the whole long section, but I have memorized that subsection F says that it's a disorder or malfunction which results in a person learning differently. It's not enough to simply make the case that the child learns differently in the sense of they're a visual spatial learner or the kinesthetic learner, or that their brain is wired differently, or that they can't read not because they have dyslexia, but simply because they're an instructional casualty. To fulfill that requirement about the learning differently, you actually need the disorder.
And people need to come out for that it's a disability. Some parents might say, hate the fact, saying, oh, my child's got a disability. But it's the only way. And for me, I'd rather say I have a disability than a learning style. Because you could say that everyone has a learning style. Then you need to show the real difference is disability, because that's straight to the point, that's strong, and that's effective, and that's going to actually make people stop, wait, these people need help.
Parents and their professionals can use the word disability. It's time now to de-shame that word. No one is ashamed of having to wear glasses because they have a vision issue, which is technically a disability. Dyslexia is a neurobiological problem. It is not a moral failing. It's not a lack of willpower. It is nothing to be ashamed of. And so therefore, calling it by its correct name, disability, will not only be more accurate, but will also, arguably, if you meet a number of other conditions, bring you within the legislation. Often teachers and principals will say that disability adjustments for children with disability level the playing field or are designed to level the playing field. And perhaps in some cases they do, but for the vast majority of children with disability, they don't level it. They just make it slightly more level. They make it slightly fairer.
So we chuck these kids into this situation where they're on the clock and they've got to be able to muster what they can remember and quickly put it in print and get out, basically get out what's in their head in a coherent and cohesive form. And this will always be a challenge for dyslexic kids.
As well as responding to slow reading speeds, slow processing, slow writing, it allows them, if nothing else, to keep the lid on that anxiety so that the child starts the exam thinking, probably I'm going to finish.
Exams are an awful way to get a human being to show you what they know. And most people in education will tell you, they'll puzzle with you, why do we still do this? Where else on earth do you need to recall so much information in a timed high-pressure situation and get it all on paper? So look, exams are a bit nuts anyway, for a start, but then you add the layer of a reading disability, and they're just diabolical.
There are many kinds of adjustments in terms of the way that you can alter the test paper, alter the setting, alter the response format, or even choose a whole different kind of format to assess. So instead of a limited time test, you could give an untimed test, or you could say to a child, you could do a PowerPoint, or you could do a presentation to the class, or you could make a speech. On the topic of IEPs, and there are a lot of words that are used interchangeably for IEPs. Some people say that our Australian legislation is deficient in that we don't have legislatively mandated IEPs. IEPs are basically just another word for lists of disability adjustments.
The development of an individual education plan that is compiled at a kind of case level where you're bringing in the parents to contribute. Certainly if the student is old enough, if we're talking about older students in the system, the student themselves should be involved in this process. So we are looking at a collaborative effort. We're looking at the support that is needed to be provided to the teacher, adequate support that will allow this to work, excellent resources that will support them in their programs that they're putting in place, and a really good knowledge of what sorts of strategies might be useful for this student.
These students that have struggled for years, from prep to grade 6, struggled with literacy and have consistently failed, they know that. And then when they find a teacher that is willing to present that work in a different manner, they are very appreciative.
I would say if you have dyslexia, it doesn't mean anything. You just learn and think differently.
You can go through it in different ways and you can figure it out.
The teacher knows that they have those problems and the teacher has to give them extra support.
It's because the teacher I have understands what I need, explains everything well, and gives me lots of help. Well, she just helped me understand to know what they're trying to ask you. My teacher gives me very simple instructions so I don't forget them. So I just need to know the main ideas of the problem.
If they listen to you, help you out and find a way to help the child read properly.
Teachers can spend more time explaining to me and give me more time to finish.
Well, if we're doing tests, the teachers sometimes give me some more time than the other kids, because then I can read the question and actually get it right. Rather, if I'm trying to write and read the question really quickly, I might misread the question, and so I don't get the answer right.
And we can't do everything like everyone else because we're just different. And if they can accommodate us by helping us say, oh, that's all right, we can help you by doing a PowerPoint instead of doing a written task, that would be just great. It would make our lives so much easier.
She shows me, or he shows me, an example, not just saying it, and showing it to me.
I'm a visual learner, so I like to learn by seeing stuff. I like to learn by doing it in real life.
I like to learn listening, and I like learning on the computer.
Well, with Google, you can search up words, but you'd have to flick through a dictionary and stuff, so it's much more quicker and you can get more work done when you have technology.
I figured out that I can be exactly like everyone else, but I just need to be told more things. I need to be explained easier. I need to be given more examples. I just need to be given more time to be able to do it. And I was able to do it. And then it hit me, I could be exactly like all those other people. I just need to tell them that I just do things differently.
What we used to do is give them slabs of work, slabs of text, and say, let's read it together. But with dyslexic students, they can't read that. It's too small for them, it's not interesting for them, and it's not fun. But now it's broken down in stages for them. Whereas previously, it was, we're going to do it all together. So every student was treated the same. Now we treat the student differently because every student is different in the class.
The use of assistive technology, the way in which we deliver instructions, the amount of repetition that takes place in a classroom, making sure that we are actually taking children back, reminding them of where we have come from, the checking for understanding.
Looking, thinking, I do a lot of talking. We do a lot of talking, we do a lot of brainstorming. We do a lot of then mind mapping, we do a lot of planning then, and we do a lot of group work.
Five vowels in the alphabet, and this is their short sound. And that's the 5 short vowel sounds. Ready, long vowels. There are 5 vowels in the alphabet, and this is their long sound. A-E-I-O-U, 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 and that's the 5 long vowel sounds.
Good teaching and learning for dyslexic children is good for all children. Learning with visual, auditory and kinesthetic approaches to teaching is good for everybody.
That might be by giving them a visual representation of perhaps all the steps in a mathematical problem. You might give them a diagram to show them a science experiment and what's going to happen when. You might record something that is the homework explanation for that week.
Delivering instructions with a gap in between each instruction is really important. Delivering at a slightly slower rate and obviously delivering less instructions between each lot of activity that gets carried out.
Watch this word, catcut, at, short vowel. Lindsay, watch this, catcut, at. Just one vowel if it's a short vowel. Now Lachlan knows this one. Lachlan, if it's got a long vowel sound, how many vowels do you need to use?
Well done, girls and boys. When vowel teams go walking, the first one does the talking.
I give everyone the big picture. You know, this is what we're going to do, and this is what it's going to look like at the end. So I give everyone the big picture. Then I go back and say, okay, our first job is to. So then I break it down into the smaller steps.
Two-way feedback is important, and by that we mean that the teachers obviously give the students feedback, saying this is where you've done really well, this is where you could be improving. But at the same time, as part of their constant checking for understanding, they are checking in with the student to find out from the student and getting the feedback from the student, was there a way they could have done it better? Could they have delivered the material better? What works best for that student in terms of the delivery instruction?
You can ask them for a response, and you can monitor whether you think they know it or not. And a lot of the starting points I do is we have a little brainstorm. What do you know? Who can tell me about this? What do you know about this? And then you can sort of gauge what they are knowing, or what they're confused about, or what they're just totally off the track about. And then you can bring the learning back to the explicit teaching, the direct teaching.
Fingers and sound it out first. Go. A-U-E. What's the vowel sound? Short or long? Short. Who knows which one's the naughty word? Can you show us, Georgina? Can you point to the naughty word? Yeah. How do you know that's the naughty word?
Because the N didn't double.
We didn't double the consonant. Can you rub that naughty word out for us? Is she right? Yeah. Give her a yeehaw. Yeehaw.
Scaffolding in the sense that you start with a whole lot of support in place when you're learning a new skill. So the idea is to determine what a student already knows, and to determine what they're capable of knowing based on what they already know, and then to provide a bridge.
And those letters were going to have a special job. They were going to make a short sound and a long sound. And they got a special name. What was their name, Tyler? What are they called?
Vowels.
The vowels. If I point to you, see if you can give me a vowel. Brilliant. Give me a vowel, Caleb. Fantastic. Maya. Fantastic. Lindsay. Oh, you're brilliant. Who could give me the last one? Electra.
You.
Fantastic. Now they can make a short sound. Let's do the short sound together. Hands down.
You've got to start from where kids are. You've got to build on what they already know and take them then to the next step of where they need to go, what they don't know. You can't focus on that unknown. I mean, there's lots of things they can't do, but you don't focus on that. You focus on what they can do.
That there is a lot of repetition. So if we are teaching 5 vocabulary words for our day, and we're wanting all the children to remember discombobulate and extraordinary and repulsive, those are 3 of our words, then we're going to need to say those words a lot during the course of that day. We're going to need to get the children saying those words a lot. We're going to need to play games that require calling out those words quite loudly. There's lots of things that need to happen, but underneath them all, it's around the notion of repetition. So repetition is vitally important.
The objective is to reteach what they need to be retaught. Practice. So that, as you saw, there's drill in there. Lots of revision.
A lot of the support structures I put in a classroom are children being tutors for other children, and it's amazing how well they do that job. If the children can't read something, and often they can't read the instructions, and even if they can read the instructions, they don't know what to do. So I pair them up with a study buddy, and the study buddy then will read the instructions and explain what it means.
Accommodations need to be made to ensure that that student is given the opportunity to participate in the same activity as everyone else in the class through some alternative means. So perhaps it's through having the book electronically provided to the student. Perhaps there are other things that are done at that time to ensure that that student has access to the same material as everybody else. It's not about necessarily building skill, it's about ensuring access.
Make sure that you give them every opportunity to be showing their skills and give them an opportunity to do their assessments or their assignments in ways which are not print-based. They should still be working on their reading and their spelling, but they need ways to also get around the print barrier and show the skills that they've got.
Differentiate the content, the activity, the point of entry, the assessment task, the time given to complete an assessment task. One of the modifications the teacher makes is to use the iPad as assistive technology, and so instead of handwriting the task, the boys will type the task out and email it to the teacher. The teacher also adjusts the length of time allocated to complete that task.
And on a lot of the assessment wants the children to write their explanation of how something works, but I find with a lot of the dyslexic children, they're not capable of writing that themselves. So I get them to talk to me about it, tell me how you know, and I'll scribe for them. Sometimes I use the computer too, where they can go on to some of the programs, then record themselves. A lot of the assessment too, I get them to either do a PowerPoint for me or do a slideshow for me, or to deliver an oral presentation to the class. It's all ways that they can demonstrate their learning without actually having to write a whole essay.
Using assistive technology to assist with writing, to assist with reading, to assist with spelling, those kinds of things make a huge difference for the student who finds those tasks extraordinarily difficult on a day-by-day basis.
They need access, and they need easy access to software such as speech-to-text and text-to-speech. It needs to simply be on the desktop.
But whatever you give a student, you must teach them how to use it. You don't want to turn a student off of using technology forever. No, that's always too hard, I'm not doing it. You want to introduce it simple enough that they'll give things a go. Because it's hard. They don't want to do it. If something's really hard, do you do it? It's one of those things where you have to sort of think, how can I help this child become independent and learn that they can do it themselves?
So allowing them to use the computers whenever they need. I've found programs on the internet even that have like audio options. So if my kids are doing like a reading task, they can actually listen to it on audio instead of just having to read it off the computer.
The first technology that I'd probably look at is technology to help them remember their own ideas. Some of those tools might be early entry MP3 recorders. You can get microphones that have USB sticks that you can put into a computer. There's big point talking points, which are like those little recorders that they can hold and say their idea, and then they listen to it and write it down. Later on, you might go into PowerPoint, because PowerPoint's actually got a feature where you can actually go into the Insert tab, go into the voice part and actually record your ideas.
And the kids in my grade, like at the moment, even with their writing, because I've got quite a few in my grade with dyslexia, they jump straight on the computers to type their stories because they can get it out better. Whereas if you give them the pen and paper, they struggle a little bit more. It takes them longer to write.
Some students will actually find that the word prediction helps them because they've not been writing down words they know they can't write. Imagine getting to a word that's an idea in your head and then you're thinking, I can't write that word, and then trying to find another word that you can use instead. And if you've got a working memory problem, what was the rest of your idea? You've forgotten it, it's all lost already. And so it's just finding ways of empowering them to capture their ideas and be able to go back and get those ideas.
One of the recommendations there was that Jordan uses assistive technology. So he used that for NAPLAN as well. And for assessments and for home assignments. And it just takes away that pressure of stopping and thinking about how to spell, my grammar, my punctuation, the anxiety that comes with that. He can just get his really great imaginative ideas down and produce great stories or great answers.
Multisensory is all about incorporating as many senses as possible to come in and support the content of what we're teaching them. So we like the output to be delivered multisensory and the input to be multisensory.
So let's do away. A. I see it at the end and I hear it at the end and I feel it at the end. Good girl.
It's a matter of taking speech to print and teaching the children how to hear sounds within words first and then how to translate those sounds into the written form. Being language-based, we also know that not only do students need to be taught the letter-sound correspondences, but they need to go on and learn the understanding of how those words work.
It's extremely important to use multisensory approaches. There's certainly evidence to support the use of multisensory teaching strategies. I think that possibly those strategies are far more important than people realise.
We make sure that we're linking the sounds to the symbols. Children can have problems processing the sounds. They can also have problems with rapid automatic naming. They're two things that often get in the way of children with dyslexia. We make sure they understand those sounds and how language works. When you take a sound out of a word, what it does. When you put a sound back into a word, what it does.
Tyler, would you find the OA digraph at the middle or the end of the word? Middle. Everyone, where would you find the OA digraph in the middle of the word? O-W. Rhymes with O starts with B. Rhymes with O starts with T. Rhymes with O starts with F.
They get to hear how language works, and that's a very important foundation for building on the rest of it. We then make sure that they know how those sounds are represented in the written form. So you go through and you systematically teach every single one of those as well, so that they know what the sounds, how they're represented. We then teach them the rules and the structure around words and how to put them together. And when you add an ED to a word, for example, when you're making something past tense, sometimes it sounds like an ed, sometimes it sounds like a d and a t or a t on the end. So, but you have to spell that with an ED.
Say packed for me.
Packed.
Do you hear the very last sound?
Yeah, it's...
Packed. Now, you hear a t sound on the end of packed, but it's not spelled with a T. It's repetition, it's structure, moving quickly along from what they've already learned. Because I say to kids when they start, you know a lot of the letters and sounds. The problem with dyslexia is it muddles you. And the job of me and this structure is to unmuddle you. So we'll move them quickly through what they've got, spend a bit longer on what they need, a lot of practice and rehearsal at, and just start to rebuild that system.
When the vowel comes just before the CK, it can only be short. So it can only say I.
MSL, not only is it direct and explicit, it's also got your diagnostic teaching built in. So it's none of this, let's test at the start and test at the end. We are diagnostic teachers that are always looking out for how well we're teaching, and it's going to be your student that tells you how well you've taught. So what we do say, if the child doesn't get it, it's never their fault, it's the teacher's.
English isn't crazy. There is actually a very good structure to it if you understand the structure and you teach them that structure, and they cope with it beautifully.
One of the most, I think, profound changes that has been proposed over the last decade or so is the approach of using a three-wave model or three-tier model. The idea that we get in early, that we make sure that with very good screening, with very good early identification, with high quality early instruction, we will capture the vast majority of students. At least 80% of students will be well catered for in that first wave. We get the best possible start and early intervention for those students who need it. The second wave that needs to be incorporated into this 3-wave model is the idea that even with this, there are going to be some students who perhaps struggle more than others, who need a little bit of an additional level of scaffolding and support, and perhaps need some small group intervention to really provide them with that very necessary additional practice that they require, the repetition of the skill set that they're developing, the conceptual knowledge that they're developing. Our third tier is where we really do start saying, now these are students who do seem to have some fairly serious, persistent and enduring problems. It's that third tier, it's a much smaller group, and we're talking about that the 1 or 2 children in every classroom who really continues to struggle a lot despite all of this great support, the high quality instruction, the evidence-based intervention that's being provided to them under the expert guidance of their teacher. And we're looking at what else does this student need.
When you're actually teaching a struggling reader, every child's different, and it's really hard to know how to intervene with teaching them how to read. So I think you actually have to withdraw them and start at the level that they're at and then work them up. Otherwise, it's always band-aiding. So I really do think that it needs a concentrated effort with a specialist class and a specialist teacher. When we train volunteers, we give them an overview of an approach for decoding. The pool of volunteers come from Gold Coast Volunteering, the Gold Coast Institute of TAFE and Griffith University. We've also had Southern Cross University involved. The volunteers are always reporting back to me saying, or giving me little testimonials or anecdotes of how a student starts to basically just become, I guess, more self-confident. They've got a greater belief in themselves. They just basically start to shine because they finally understand that they can do this, they're not dumb, they're not stupid, and they've had that history of feeling like they have been that way.
To support their self-esteem and improve their resilience so that they can get through life understanding that having a reading problem is, it's unfortunate. Having a problem with learning to read is really no different to having a problem with learning to play the piano, but if you're kind of piano resistant, you just say to your parents, I don't want to have piano lessons anymore. And everyone goes, well, that's a shame, isn't it? But never mind. But if you have a reading problem, there is anyone saying to you, that's not a problem, that's fine, you just won't have reading lessons anymore, because reading has an impact on every single, every single minute of your waking hours. So these kids need to be taught that if you've got a reading problem, it doesn't make you strange or weird. It's just people are good and bad at different things. They just unfortunately happen to be bad at something that society is saying is really important to have. So their self-esteem needs to be supported, and their resilience to that needs to be supported as well. So they can go have a happy life whilst living with this thing that, unfortunately has more impact on their lives than not being able to play the piano.
And when kids get over that hump and they realise it's the way their brain's learning and it's not them, things start to turn around really quickly. I've had parents come in after kids have had 1 or 2 sessions and said, what are you doing? This is magic. And I say, well, it can't be anything I've taught them. We're just getting them over that self-loathing hump that a lot of these kids have.
We've got to build them up, they need that confidence. And if they're confident, they're just like, they can do anything.
It's so critical that these children experience the success because they've had lots and lots of, less than successful experiences at school, and that erodes your sense of self-esteem. And they come out of these things, feeling like they can do this, and they start to bounce off the walls, and they walk a couple of feet higher because they know now that they can do this if it's just delivered in the right way. Plus, we make it a bit of fun as well, and we joke around, and learning should be fun.
So I think self-esteem is the most important thing. Everybody sees themselves as a learner. Everybody sees themselves as being successful. That keeps them motivated to keep learning and to keep listening to you day in and day out, to keep attempting the tasks you're giving them, because they feel they can succeed at it, in it. And then just giving that support they need to be successful.
The emotional impact is more. It's actually more important than the extent of the dyslexia, and that's been the basis for most of my work. It's a very happy message. Resilience is a skill that for anybody takes a lot of learning. The first component is learning about how you're coping at the moment with difficulty. There are many ways to cope. You might decide that the way you're coping at the moment is fine, but you'll learn lots of other ways to cope, and you'll also learn which ways of coping are not so good.
I had a student a couple of years ago who just would give up on everything. So she didn't have those coping strategies. It was just, I can't do it. And yeah, by the end of the year, she was recognising that there's ways that you can actually overcome those difficulties by providing them with an environment that's more supportive and suited to their needs. It's helped their confidence.
The second segment is how to deal with the negative self-talk that comes when we experience difficulty. So for this particular situation, instead of saying, I can't spell this word, I'm hopeless, I'm never going to learn anything, and this is going to happen all my life, instead of thinking and then feeling that response that comes, these young people can learn to say, I can't spell a word, it's because I've got dyslexia. I'm going to ask my friend how to spell it, or look it up on the computer in the spell check, and then keep going with what I'm doing. So in other words, keeping the difficulty contained to a particular place and time instead of letting it completely overwhelm and cause depression.
Becoming assertive is a very important part of success in dyslexia, and I think that's what has shown some success with students that have gone into year 7s, 8 and 9s. 3 sentence starters that they have as a base to rely on in difficult situations. A child might respond with, when you I feel I would rather, and then they provide an alternative.
The third is how to figure out what it is that you really want in your life, and to set that goal. And that goal has to be the student's goal, not a person's parent's goal or the teacher's goal. It has to really be the student's goal. And then the motivation kicks in. And how to deal with setbacks to that goal, and how to ask assertively for what you need rather than getting angry or giving up.
The importance of goal setting for these students is that they've got to be what is referred to as the SMART goals. They have to be measurable goals so that the student can see that they are achieving along a certain timeline. They need to be achievable, and they need to be realistic. Those goals have to be balanced with a resilience, because if they don't achieve those goals, they need to have the resilience to bounce back and to find another coping strategy, perhaps, to achieve that goal in a different way.
To see in some of the trials the changes that happened to young people, it's just so gratifying to see, people come into these classes look with a depressed situation often with their body language, and it changes, and they change from that to looking you in the eye and looking hopeful. And that is enormously rewarding.
Well, when I started going, Mr. Beachy explained what it was and the things I can do, so it built up my courage. So then I started asking the teachers for more help, and I eventually did my work and I stopped daydreaming.
They have higher self-esteem and more willing to say to the teachers, look, I don't understand that. Can you help me, or can you break it down for me, or show me just some of the text instead of the whole text? They're more vocal in their learning, and they're also more persistent in getting it right now. Instead of just giving up, it's too hard, I can't do it, they're more persistent in having a go.
Why is it that some children learn so easily and others struggle? I think I always had a passion for it, but never quite knew what to do. Knowing where to start then, giving me the strategies of where to start and where to work to. And if I'd only had that knowledge 20 years ago, how much more of a difference may I have made?
Yeah, my teaching has changed dramatically since I became aware of dyslexia, and I only wish I had become aware of it so much earlier.
So the first thing is a change of culture, and so the first element is to accept that dyslexia exists, accept that it is a difference that children have.
And it'd be great if teachers could accept that's how I learn, and they could go towards the strategies of helping me, because I wish I can change how I can learn, but they have to teach me. Well, I have to teach them that this is how I learn, and you have to help me.
That if the child isn't learning, we need to look at why they're not learning and don't expect the child to change, but we need to change our teaching in order for them to learn effectively, because they just need to be taught in a different way.
You don't want to be labelled as a dyslexic school and then have all the students who have dyslexia coming to your school, but they're already there. And as a principal, you have to make sure that every single student achieves in your classroom, and you have to differentiate the program to suit all the students. And if that means changing something small in the classroom to allow other kids to have success, you have to do it.
You're going to be kicked down. You're going to be, not physically, but mentally kicked down. You're going to be pushed. You're going to be stretched to your limits. You're going to be asked to do things that you don't know how to do. And you just got to face them. You got to accept that you can't do them. You got to be able to tell people that you can't do them. You got to be able to face the facts, and then you'll start to learn that you'll get there, but in your own time. And then you feel better about it because you're accepting it. And when you do get there, you feel amazing.